think I heard the phrase context matters almost 10 times in the last hour, right? If I walk over and shoot my trial partner in the head, you know nothing else, right? But if I tell you that she slept with my husband, if I tell you that we didn't get along, there were issues at work,
objection,
right?
improper argument.
If I start to give you, right, context to the why some irrational, illogical thing happens, right? Context does matter. Let's just be very, very clear. Every single person that came into this courtroom, that sat in this chair, that gave you a piece, right, of the context that led us to November 7, 2006, that is a piece of evidence. Every single word that escaped every person's mouth when they were asked a question, what they said is a piece of evidence that you, members of the jury, get to use and use your common sense as you are rendering your verdict. When I got up here in opening, we talked about, in order to understand what happened on November 7th, we have to go back, just back, to 2004. We didn't stop there, right? Because it was a 2-year sort of simmering that was going on. Because if we start, right, back to the relationship between Bryan and the defendant, right? It starts in 2004, which the defendant tells you in his own statement, right? That fight that happens, and he says, I cried. In his statement, he says, I cried after that fight.
Objection, mischaracterization of the testimony.
You will get to hear it for yourself.
Your recollection of him.
You will get to hear it for yourself. Go back and play it. He says, I cried. 15 years later, when he talks to Detective Segovia, right, that memory is burned in his mind. That is the beginning, right? He has now been in this situation, right, with the 3 upperclassmen. He gets bested by Bryan, and he looks at that guy and he says, I don't like him. That's where it starts. Then it turns into, right, hatred. Because then what happens, right? The guy who beats him up in a fight the one time, who kind of makes fun of him in front of the other players, right? Because it's a locker room and it's football and it's a bunch of guys, right? Rashaun says, and I cried, so it obviously left an impression. Now that's his sort of mark, right? For the next 2 years, they start to have conflicts. Starts with partly Jada. We know, they told you, and he says it, they hooked up when they were freshmen. He tells Detective Diaz, we were together for 2 or 3 months when we were freshmen. They were freshmen in 2004. 2005, Bryan starts to date Jada. It doesn't matter that he had a rich girlfriend at some point in 2006. The girl he wanted was with Bryan, Jada. And he tells you in his own statement, he says, she caused problems between us because I would go to her and I would say something to her and she would take it to him. He even uses the word, why are you getting me in trouble with Bryan? Because then, of course, right, Bryan, that's his girlfriend. We know that he was causing issues with all the guys and their girlfriends, right? Would go and be like, hey, verbal altercation would go down. This was 2 years, right, of ongoing toxicity. Call it what you want. Call it locker room antics, call it football players, whatever it was, they didn't like each other. And he is the one who didn't like Bryan. He was insignificant to Bryan. So this isn't just 2004, this one fight happens. This is sort of 2 years, right, of pressure that's being put on Rashaun. And eventually what happens? When there's enough pressure, he cracks. He tells you in his own statement that day, because all of the context matters. He tells you, yes, he got suspended. That was his fault. He got high and he got suspended. Strike 2. But he also tells you, when he tells Detective Segovia, I had a meeting with Coach Coker. Coach Coker was not happy. Crack. What happens? The kid who has a full-time scholarship to UM is on the brink of losing it. You heard from Tony Hernandez, who told you exactly how the drug tests work, right? He had already been tagged because he'd done 2. The next one was coming. Right around that time, what is happening? The guy with the girl who's about to hit the NFL, right? About to make all this money, has everything he wants. There is no logic in jealousy. That's what it is. he goes to blame the person, even though it's his fault he's not on the team. It's his fault he's getting in trouble with Coach Coker. But what does he do? No, that's not my fault. It's Bryan. I never liked that guy, Bryan. Because that's what happens. He starts to simmer, and he breaks. So then defense says, oh no, these are these innocent things that he does. These things are not suspicious. They are innocent. It's just innocent that he decides to change his phone on November 7th. Let's sort of break everything down, right? So also to add to the context, let's talk about the 38 first, right? The gun. In those 2 years, context matters, right? In those 2 years around the locker room, right, he brags about owning a 38. He shows Dave a revolver. Dave sees it. It doesn't matter whether Dave saw it in one dorm room versus another. What's consistent is Dave said, I saw a gun. I had never seen a gun in my life, and I saw a gun. I know what I saw. I know it was a revolver because I used to watch Westerns with my brother. George Hertel tells you that it was a 38 lead caliber bullet. That's what he tells you. And that's consistent with the same type of gun that Dave says he sees. It's also consistent with what Kareem says. It's not weird, right? Actually, let me say, it is a little weird that he tells Kareem that. But it's not weird if you think about the context of Rashaun Jones, right? Who's already in a position where he's trying to make himself seem like a tough guy amongst the team. He's messing with everybody.
That's not evidence.
He's messing with everybody's girlfriend. Like, it's not weird that he's going to go up to an upperclassman to try to make himself look tough. That's what that is. Hey, man, I got a 38. Like, as if everybody's going to think, oh, my gun is cool. That's what that is. That's not some, like, innocuous. Everything plays a part in what was going on here because context matters. By the way, the 38 was the one thing that the Miami-Dade Police Department did not release. It was the one thing that has always been kept under wraps. And the one person that was known to have a 38 that hated Bryan, right?
Objection.
Ill will, hatred, spite.
Objection. Gately, I have a motion.
Was it offended? Let's talk about the team meeting. The team meeting that now all of a sudden he didn't go because he was suspended. The thing is the story changes. And the story changes from the defendant's own mouth. From what he tells detectives initially when they first talk with him. When he first tells Detective Pat Diaz, when they first talk to him, it's, well, I didn't go to the team meeting. I got a call from someone who said it was mandatory, but I don't know who called me. That's what he says the first time, and that was back then. Then when he talks to Detective Segovia, it's, well, I didn't go because, I was suspended from the team, and I felt bad. But then it was, I didn't go because I talked to Sherry, and we decided that I shouldn't go to the meeting because I was suspended. I mean, defense says there's no evidence that he fled out of the state. Members of the jury submit to you that night he did flee. He was the only person who doesn't go to the team meeting. And where does he go? To Miami Beach. These records speak for themselves. They are here. Sergeant Carmesini testified. Towers 206 and 209 were the home towers. They were the towers that he frequently connected to, right? Tower 142 was the tower in front of the crime scene. He tells us that towers 207 and 163 are the towers of Miami Beach. We know, right? And he also told us that, based off what Sherry told us, right? Because Sherry also gave us a different story. Sherry's story was, I didn't hear from him. I didn't know that he had been suspended. But then when I heard from him, he told me he had gone for a drive. So when we look at his records, right, and we see, when is it most consistent that it looks like he's moving? right after the homicide. Sergeant Cremasini told you. He looked at the records and it looked like he was most likely moving right after the homicide. So it wasn't in the afternoon when he had gotten suspended that he went for a drive because he was so distraught about the marijuana. It was after he had just killed somebody. And then, right, then he tells us that around 21:09, he says, to about 22:19, he hits on those same towers, 206. He likely went home. So he kills someone, he's moving around, distraught, panicking.
Objection, mischaracterization of the testimony.
Ends up going back home, resetting, and then what does he do? Calls Mike Sanders. I need money. Somebody who's detached, not somebody on the football team, not his girlfriend, somebody who's detached. I need money. I can't tell you why. I won't tell you why. Mike Sanders is so weirded out by that he goes down to the HEC Center to tell coaches and tell detectives what it was about that call. It wasn't, I need money because I'm broke, because I can't pay for lunch tomorrow. It was, I need money, I won't tell you why. If it was that he was this broke college student, why not just say, hey, I need money because I can't have dinner tonight? So, but that's just an innocent fact, right? When we look at it, when we look at that, just taking that fact on its own, sure. But now, when you put it into the context of what's happening, Bryan is dead. Bryan dies on November 7th. He gets shot in the head. Not 3.5 hours later, when he's supposed to be at the University of Miami mandatory team meeting. It is not a regular meeting. It is not a football meeting. It is not weightlifting. It is a mandatory meeting because a player has died. Somebody on the team is dead. And he doesn't go because he's worried about his suspension, because he's so upset at himself. Somebody's dead. But he's calling somebody and asking for money. And then he ends up going to Miami Beach, which, let's keep looking at the records, because what time does he get to Miami Beach? Sergeant Cremasini told you it was almost at 23:36. That's 11:36 is when he starts to get to the area of Miami Beach, where he's going to go stay with Sherry, which he told Detective Segovia. And she told you, yeah, he came to my house that night. She said, oh no, he came early. He tells Detective Segovia, I got there at like 8:30.
Objection, mischaracterization of the testimony.
You can hear it for yourselves. Yet, at 1 a.m. is the only time that she's arguably blowing up his phone. At 1 a.m., he was already supposed to be there. Miami Beach, which he has to cross a big bridge with a body of ocean to get there. I submit to you, it's a pretty easy place to toss a gun out of a window. It's not till 1 a.m. that he ends up with her, because her last phone call and his last phone call is like 1:19 a.m. that day. So that's when they're finally together. So he does flee. He does ditch the meeting. And he does go to Miami Beach. He doesn't lie low there. He blames it on the suspension, but he goes because if he shows up to UN, he's going to be caught. Let's talk about Sherry. How convenient when defense argues that she couldn't remember. She was so genuine in her not remembering. She was covering for him. She tells detectives around the time of the homicide, right in 2007 when she first talks to them, I was worried that he was going to get blamed. Detective Pat Diaz told you. She said, I was worried he was going to get blamed. Why would you be worried that your boyfriend is going to get blamed for the murder of a player that he didn't get along with, when according to you, you never even talked about the fact that they never got along? Then it was, I was worried he was going to be dead. When asked the logical question, because of course Bryan's dead, so of course she assumed he was going to be dead because Bryan was dead, so maybe they got into it. It was, oh no, somebody else got shot. What's so interesting, or what I find so interesting, is her brother was on the football team. Yet at no point did she say, oh, I was worried about my brother. She told you Ross Abramson was on the football team. At no point, she's worried about him, but she's worried about him because UN players are getting shot, but she's not worried about her brother. I was so worried about him, I blew up his phone. You can absolutely look at these records for yourself. The only time that she is blowing up his phone, where they really make contact, is by 11:30. And she told you she was worried because by the time she gets told by Willie Cooper, at that point, nobody knows where Rashaun is. Nobody knows where he is. He's not at the meeting. He's supposed to be at the meeting, but we don't know where he is. Then she says, oh, I started calling people frantically looking for him. I asked her to point to the 386 number of his grandmother. She says she called the grandmother. It wasn't on her records. She also says she starts blowing his phone up, but because she hadn't heard from him. But his records show that they were in communication. They were talking. So she knew where he was. She wasn't really that worried. But then what does she do? She's a little worried, he's going to get blamed, starts to do what, a loyal girlfriend does, cover his tracks. She said, I knew Coach Swayze, I called him. She doesn't really blow him up until almost 1 o'clock in the morning. By that point, he was supposed to have already been there, according to what he tells Detective Segovia. And listen, if you want to say, there's been a long time, maybe he got the time wrong. It's very different to say 8:30 at night that you went there versus 1 o'clock in the morning when he got there late that night. And it's also very interesting when the memory is selective because you remember, right? You remember that fight with Bryan where he made you cry. You remember Bruce Johnson calling you and telling you the meeting was mandatory. But then it's selective. Oh, I don't remember, that I went for a drive. I don't remember, the random little things. Then he says his phone was off. Again, he says at some point my phone was off. I didn't want anybody to contact me. I didn't want anybody to know what was going on because of my suspension. Except he's on the phone repeatedly. He's on the phone on this phone and he's on the phone on his 973 number before he changes it. The records are right here. You can look for yourself. He is on the phone. So he was you can't have it both ways. You can't be so distraught that I want my phone off and I don't want anybody to contact me, but I'm talking to everybody that I want to be talking to. Because he does call home. He says he doesn't want home to know. Home is here, and he talks to home. So you do or you don't. Changing a phone number is not some random innocent thing that happens. Sure, taking this fact alone on November 7th is one thing. But when you put it into the context of what happened that day, it's different. Defense says, he just changes his number, no big deal. No, he changes his number because he's hiding. He is hiding because he has cracked at that point. He has decided, I am going to Bryan's house and I'm going to confront him after practice. For whatever that reason may be. He chooses to change his number. He chooses to go down there, right? And he chooses to shoot Bryan in the head. Which, by the way, defense has ignored the fact that we know from even just the body itself and the photos that you saw. His cash was in his wallet. His car keys to his luxury SUV were untouched. This was not a robbery. This was personal. This was personal. Nobody else wanted Bryan dead but Rashaun Jones.
Objection. Facts not in evidence.
Rashaun Jones hated Bryan. That is an element. Ill will, hatred, and spite. That is what this case is about. It is about a kid who was so jealous, who was the cause of his own downturn, but blamed the one guy on the team that he didn't like. He went down to his house to confront him, and he shot him. It was not a robbery. It was not anything but something that was personal. Let me just point out, I want to round out a little bit of sharing. I think she was asked by defense, did he tell you that he had anything to do with it? And she was like, no, absolutely not. That she selectively remembers. The girl who couldn't remember what she had told a reporter 5 years earlier because now her memory has changed. The girl who now says, oh no, he wanted me to talk to police. He wanted me to talk to them. You heard from detectives, when they showed up, they didn't even expect him to be there. He was there driving her car, and he says, no, you can't talk to her. This wasn't police can't talk to my girlfriend. This was, you can't talk to her because I don't want her to talk to you. I don't want her to tell you anything alone. And it was, you can talk to her, but I gotta be there. Because he wanted to know what the police were asking. Detective Hellman and Detective Diaz told you exactly what went down. Let's go. I'd like to talk a little bit about his statements to police because I think that, again, the most inconsistent statements are really from the defendant. First, it's the firearm. No, he says I never owned a firearm. There are at least 5 other people who came here to talk about him with a firearm.
Objection. Facts not an evidence. Mischaracterization of the testimony.
Okay, you're denying recollection of the evidence. You can continue.
The only one who says, well, I never saw him with a firearm, the girlfriend. No.
Objection. Mischaracterization of the evidence.
The revolver that he bragged about in the locker room, that all the players had heard about.
Objection. Mischaracterization of the evidence.
The revolver that he showed to Dave. But no, he tells detectives, when asked, well, if they all came and they said it, are they lying? Yeah, no, they're lying. Then he says, same thing with Mike Sanders. So if there's a call on your phone records where you're calling Mike, asking him for money, that call, that's a lie from Mike? What motive, what does Mike have? Why would Mike make that up? Who wasn't even on the football team. He was adjacent. He tells detectives he decides to skip that meeting because he was so upset. Telling me you're already on thin ice with the coaches and the team and you're not going to show up to a meeting where someone's dead. And that's the reason of the meeting that you know is mandatory. The only person not to come. And by the way, this isn't, again, an isolated fact that defense says, oh, this is innocent. They took the innocent fact that he didn't show up to that meeting and everybody ran with it. That's not what happened. The reality of the situation is that the pieces have always been there. Everything in this case pointed to one person, and it's the person sitting right there.
Objection. I have a motion.
Including the identification by Paul Connor. Paul Connor, you heard his testimony. Defense cannot have it both ways. They cannot argue that he's honest about, the one thing, but then he's dishonest about the other stuff. Let's be very, very clear. Paul Connor has no reason to lie. Paul Connor is an independent person who was walking home that day. He didn't have his car. He took the metro. He walked home. He tells you he remembers it was 6:35 when he got off the metro. He is an academic, a professor. He was shown eventually, let's talk about, he walks down, he says he hears a bang, and immediately after hearing a bang, he sees the defendant walking out. The person smiles at him and keeps going. He says in his testimony, he turned his head and he saw the person moving away quicker, hurrying away. He keeps walking to his apartment. He doesn't see Bryan's body. They showed him the photos. He doesn't see Bryan's body that is on the floor covered by the bushes. He makes his way to his apartment, which is around the complex. The next day, he goes to police because he sees the news and he says, I saw something. He tells them what he saw. Description and recognition are two different things. Describing somebody and saying, here are the facial features that I have described to this person, and recognizing someone are two different things. When he was given that lineup, he recognized the person that he saw that day, and that was the defendant. Which, by the way, he also says, which he wouldn't have known, that the lights to Bryan's car were still on. And that, conveniently for Bryan, because he changed his car for the locks to be with the 60 seconds, tells us that he was there right around the time of the gunshot. Especially because he hears it, then he sees the defendant going away, and then he makes his way back. Paul Connor was honest. He said to the second photo that he's shown when Detective Segovia goes to see him, which is not a lineup. Detective Segovia told you it was not a lineup. All he did was show it to him, and just show it to him so that he could just look at it again. It was not a lineup. This is the lineup. The photos are all dark because they have to be the same. The photos here are all blue. In the other lineup were all blue because the photos all have to be the same for the particular suspect that they were looking at. Here it was Rashaun Jones. He identifies Rashaun Jones. Paul Connor testified that he was a professor and he had 20 students in his class. He said it in his testimony. There were like 20 kids in my class. This wasn't that Rashaun Jones was in his class and they maybe crossed paths. He saw him that night. Description and recognition are two different things. He recognized Rashaun Jones, who defense gets up here and says he was on the UM football team, big player. He played one game. You heard from the coach. By the way, he was given two lineups. He was given the other lineup first, and it was a lineup of also 6 black men. He doesn't identify anybody there. He says there's nobody there that matches the person I saw. He's then given the second lineup, so he looks at 12 people. And out of the 12 people, he picks out Rashaun Jones because that's the person he saw that night. Clean white smile. Nobody asked Sherry, the girl who was making out with him all the time, what his mouth looked like.
Objection, burden shifting.
Oh,
Logically, what would you expect? Paul Connor is walking, right? And he says the person smiled at me and walked away. What did we think that person was going to do? Hey, I just shot someone. Don't say anything. I'm going to get on my way. Of course, don't be suspicious. He's just shot somebody, walking out, making his way, and then scurrying away after the person turns away. It's not weird. He's covering his tracks. Consciousness of guilt. The defendant's behaviors. When people know that they've done nothing wrong, they don't lie, they don't hide, they don't lie about where they were. Ordinary human reactions. in the context of what is going on. All of the pieces can be in a file. That is why there were cold cases. Detective Segovia told you one of his oldest cases was from 1956. All of the pieces can be there. Detectives were working on the case. Let's be very, very clear. When the judge instructs you on the law, you are going to see that time is not a defense. There is no statute of limitations for murder. I believe he did it, but I don't like the time. That is not a reasonable doubt. I believe he did it, punto.
Objection, burden, diluting the burden.
I believe he did it, full stop.
Objection, diluting the burden.
That is an abiding conviction of guilt.
Objection, diluting the burden. I have a motion.
Okay, overruled.
Time is not a defense because there is no statute of limitations to murder. The facts don't change. Memories may fade, but in the end, everyone here experienced a trauma. And you want to argue the gun in the dorm room was here, he remembered the gun. He remembered the revolver. Every single witness that testified experienced a trauma. The death of Bryan Pata. Whether they were a friend of Bryan or a friend of both, they all as a team experienced the death of a teammate. A 22-year-old in their 20s. That is something that stays with you. The big things stay with you. There is a reason why Mike Sanders has remembered. He may not remember exactly how much money, but he remembers getting that call. And you know what? It's in the records. Is Mike lying? You are not tasked with the decision about time. You are tasked with deciding what happened on November 7, 2006. Like I said in opening, the defendant's actions paved a path. His behaviors, his timings, his communications, it is the context of all of those combined circumstances that allow you, members of the jury, to render a verdict of guilty. This is a circumstantial evidence case. We have talked about all of the pieces, right? Like a rope that is made up of many different strands. Independently, they may be nimble. But when put together, right, when put together, they form a bond, an unbreakable bond. And that is what we have. Every single piece, everything that happened, starting from 2004 all the way through and past November 7th, every road points to Rashaun Jones. He is the only person who wanted him dead.
Objection, I have a motion.
He was jealous. He didn't like him. It is illogical, but that is what happens when someone is faced with an insurmountable pressure. And he was in his 20s, and he did the illogical, and he did the unthinkable, and he did what he shouldn't have done. He killed someone. And members of the jury, that is why, and after all of the evidence that you have heard in this case, the state is absolutely confident that when you go back into that jury room and you review each and every single piece of evidence, including the testimony from each and every witness that took that stand, because that is all pieces of evidence. As we talked about in jury selection, physical evidence, just like testimonial evidence, the law says is weighed the same. When you take all of that, including all of the context, back into that jury room, you will render the only verdict that justice demands, and that is that the defendant is guilty of the murder of Bryan Pata. Thank you.